You know the ark, you know the dove, you know the man who built a colossal ship to save humanity from the wrath of God. It is a story etched into the very foundation of Western civilization, a tale of sin, punishment, and ultimate salvation. But what if I told you that the man on the ark was not named Noah? What if I told you you've only heard the echo? I am the desert sage. I have walked through the ashes of empires, listening to the memories trapped beneath the Mesopotamian sand. Long before the first word of the Bible was written, another civilization documented the exact same apocalyptic flood. This secret remained buried for thousands of years, hidden deep within the ruined libraries of ancient Assyria, until the year 1872. In the cold halls of the British Museum, a self-taught decipherer named George Smith made a shocking discovery. While translating a fractured piece of clay known as Tablet 11, he read something that made him jump from his chair in disbelief. He had found the Epic of Gilgamesh, and within it, a flood narrative so identical to Genesis, it sent shockwaves through the religious world. A God who decides to wipe out mankind, a chosen man told to build a boat, the gathering of animals, the releasing of birds. The parallels were too precise to be a coincidence. The Hebrews had not invented the Great Flood, they had inherited it. During their exile in Babylon in the 6th century BC, the Jewish scholars encountered the vast literary tradition of Mesopotamia. They absorbed the ancient Sumerian memory of a devastating cataclysm, weaving it into their own theology of a righteous God. But the original story, the Sumerian truth, is far darker and much more terrifying than a tale of divine justice. Let us journey back, before the Bible, before Noah, to the real master of the deluge, a king named Utnapishtim. The Epic of Gilgamesh is humanity's oldest written masterpiece. It tells the story of a powerful king, shattered by the death of his closest friend. Terrified of his own mortality, Gilgamesh abandons his throne. He crosses mountains and oceans of death, seeking the one man who defeated the grave. He was looking for an ancient ancestor, a king from the city of Shuruppak who had survived a terrifying cataclysm before the dawn of memory. In the Hebrew Bible, you know this survivor as Noah, but thousands of years earlier, the Sumerians called him Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim was not just a righteous man, he was a king, a priest, a mortal who had witnessed the absolute cruelty of heaven. When Gilgamesh finally finds him at the edge of the world, the old king reveals the terrifying secret of his eternal life. He speaks not of a covenant with a loving creator. He speaks of a time when the earth was young and the gods walked among men. The city of Shuruppak was ancient, resting on the banks of the Euphrates. The gods lived close to mankind, but they were growing restless. You must understand, the Mesopotamian gods, the Anunnaki, did not send the flood to punish human sin or moral corruption. There was no great moral judgment. There was no grand divine plan to cleanse the earth of wickedness. The truth recorded on the clay tablets is almost absurd in its mundane cruelty. Humanity had simply become too loud. Mankind had multiplied. The noise of their cities, their laughter, and their labor rose up to the heavens like a deafening roar. The great god Enlil, the lord of wind and storms, could not sleep. Driven mad by the endless noise of mortals, he made a ruthless decision. He called a secret council of the Anunnaki. Together they swore an oath to exterminate the entire human race in one swift stroke. No warnings, no chances for redemption, just a total, immediate erasure of the human experiment. But one god disagreed. The god of wisdom, Ea, had sworn a sacred oath to the Anunnaki Council. He could not warn mankind of the impending doom. But Ea was clever. To avoid breaking his oath, he did not speak to a man. He spoke to the walls of a reed hut. Reed wall, hear my words, the voice whispered. Tear down your house and build a boat. Abandon wealth and save your life. The god provided exact, mathematical dimensions for the vessel. But this is where the ancient Sumerian truth diverges wildly from the Bible. The Ark of the Sumerian Noah was not a long, rectangular ship with a pointed bow. It was completely round. It was a massive, coracle, an enormous woven basket with a floor space of 1 full acre, rising 6 decks high into the sky. There was no keel, no prow, just thousands of tons of thick marsh reeds, bound together by the desperate hands of doomed men. To make it waterproof, they melted raw bitumen. Thousands of gallons of boiling, toxic black pitch smeared inside and out. Utnapishtim hired his entire city to build the very instrument of his survival. The ultimate betrayal was about to begin. When the citizens of Shuruppak asked their king why he was building this giant black monstrosity on dry land, he lied to them. He told them the god Enlil was angry with him. He said he must leave the city forever. And in return for their hard labor, the heavens would rain down a glorious abundance of bread, fish, and wheat upon the city. So the doomed men rejoiced and built their own tomb. It was a cruel, divine pun. The Sumerian word for abundance also meant a deluge of destruction. In just 7 days, the colossal black basket was finished. The animals were loaded. The hatches were sealed with pitch from the inside. And then, the skies went entirely black. The silence was broken. The deluge had arrived. For 6 days and 7 nights, the wind blew. The downpour, the hurricane, and the flood overwhelmed the land. The destruction was so absolute, so horrifying, that it broke the spirit of the very beings who ordered it. The tablets state that the gods themselves were terrified by the flood. They fled to the highest heaven, cowering like beaten dogs. Inside the massive black vessel, Utnapishtim wept. He looked out and saw that all of humanity had turned back into clay. You might think this is purely a myth, but modern archaeologists digging in the ruins of ancient Shuruppak found something chilling. A massive 3-foot layer of sterile river clay dating back to 2900 BC. A devastating localized cataclysm that scarred the human psyche forever. On the 7th day, the ocean grew calm. The great storm subsided. The world was a vast, silent mirror of water. Utnapishtim opened a vent. Sunlight fell upon his face, and he knew that he alone had survived the wrath of heaven. The colossal coracle drifted helplessly over the drowned world until it snagged on the jagged peaks of Mount Nemush, holding fast. For 7 more days, the ark remained stuck. It was time to test if the earth had emerged from the grave. He released a dove, but seeing no resting place, the exhausted bird returned. He then released a swallow. The swallow too came back. A story identical to Genesis, carved in clay millennia before the Hebrews existed. Finally, he sent forth a raven. The raven saw the waters receding. It ate, it flew about, and it did not return. The earth was reborn. The immortal survivor exited his wooden womb to offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving to the heavens. But when the smoke rose, he discovered a pathetic truth about the divine beings. The mighty gods of Mesopotamia were starving. Without humanity to farm the land and offer burnt sacrifices, the almighty gods had a terrifying realization. The great Anunnaki, the masters of the universe who had just wiped out millions, were starving to death. The ancient clay tablets describe it with brutal, almost humiliating honesty. When Utnapishtim lit his fire, the gods did not descend in majesty. They gathered around the smoke, quote, like a swarm of hungry flies. The immortal king looked up at his creators, and for the first time he saw them not as masters, but as pathetic, desperate creatures. For millennia, this dark and cynical reality was the accepted history of the Mesopotamian world. A world where humans were just slaves to feed the divine machinery, until a massive geopolitical shift changed everything. In 597 BC, the kingdom of Judah was conquered. The Hebrews were dragged in chains to the heart of the Babylonian Empire. During this Babylonian captivity, the exiled Jewish scholars were exposed to the vast, ancient libraries of their conquerors. They read the Epic of Gilgamesh. They absorbed the cultural memory of the catastrophic deluge. But the Hebrew scribes could not accept a theology of petty, starving gods who destroyed the world out of annoyance. So they performed the greatest act of literary adaptation in human history. They took the Sumerian blueprint, the flood, the boat, the animals, the birds, but they fundamentally altered the moral core. They erased the noise in the starving Anunnaki, replacing them with a single, righteous creator who punished human corruption. In that brilliant stroke of theological rewriting, the immortal king Utnapishtim was erased, and the righteous man Noah was born. Gilgamesh had listened to the immortal survivor. He realized that eternal life was not a divine reward, but a lonely, static prison. Yet, taking pity on the weeping hero, Utnapishtim revealed one final secret: a miraculous plant hidden at the bottom of the cosmic ocean, a mystical plant covered in sharp thorns. If Gilgamesh could grasp it, it would not grant immortality, but it would restore his lost youth. Tying heavy stones to his feet, the great king plunged blindly into the crushing, terrifying darkness of the abyss. He found it. The mystical thorns tore his hands to shreds, bleeding into the water, but he held on. He had his prize. He brought it to the surface. For a brief, intoxicating moment, humanity held the absolute cure for aging in the palm of its hand. But the gods of Mesopotamia do not allow mankind to cheat their cruel design. A single moment of exhaustion was all it took. While the great king was bathing in a cool pool, resting his bleeding hands, a serpent caught the sweet scent of the divine flower. It snatched the plant, and as it slithered away, it immediately shed its old skin, reborn young and vibrant, leaving mankind to wither. Gilgamesh sat down on the sand and wept. He had crossed the world, dived into the cosmic abyss, and lost everything to a simple reptile. And here lies the profound philosophical canyon that separates the Hebrew Bible from its much older Sumerian ancestor. In Genesis, the terrifying flood ends with a majestic rainbow, a divine covenant, a promise from a loving God that humanity is safe. The biblical story had to end with hope. It had to build a moral universe where suffering had meaning and salvation was possible. But in the original Epic of Gilgamesh, there is no rainbow, there is no covenant, there is only a snake shedding its skin in the dust. The Sumerians understood a harsher truth. Nature makes no promises, the gods are indifferent, and death is the only absolute certainty. This ancient epic is not merely a fairy tale. It is humanity's oldest trauma response. Unlike the gentle, predictable Nile of Egypt, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were violent, chaotic, and utterly merciless. To the ancient Sumerians, the known world was flat, ending at the horizon. They had no concept of a global planet. So when a catastrophic, localized flood swallowed their entire valley, to them the whole world had literally drowned. And the earth remembers. The evidence is carved into the very geological strata of modern-day Iraq. In the 1920s, archaeologists excavating the ancient cities of Ur and Shuruppak hit a massive dead zone. Beneath layers of thriving civilization, they found 3 meters of pure, sterile, water-laid river mud. And directly beneath that mud, the shattered pottery and bones of a society wiped out around 2900 BC. The Great Flood was real. It destroyed cities, it drowned thousands, but it birthed something far more enduring. It birthed our need to write, to remember, to invent a theological reason for why the universe is so incredibly cruel. The Sumerians blamed the noise of mankind. The Hebrews blamed the sins of mankind. But the terrifying water was exactly the same. Utnapishtim, Ziusudra, Noah. The names fade, the gods change, but the ghost of that ancient storm haunts us still. We are all children of the survivors. We carry their terror and their hope in the pages of our sacred books. I am the desert sage. The dust has settled on this tale, but the sands hide many more. Until the wind blows again, keep seeking the truth. Humanity survived the Great Flood. The waters receded, the mud dried, and men began to multiply once more. But it did not take long for them to find a new way to challenge the very heavens that had almost destroyed them. You know the story, the Tower of Babel, a colossal monument of arrogance built by a unified human race. A tower designed to literally pierce the heavens, a structure so blasphemous that God himself had to descend to destroy it. And to scatter them, he confused their languages so they could no longer understand one another. That is the myth. But like the Great Flood, the Tower of Babel was not a metaphor. It was a real physical address on this earth. Today, it is nothing but a colossal, flooded square trench overgrown with weeds in the modern desert of Iraq. But in the 6th century BC, standing on this exact spot was the most terrifyingly massive structure the world had ever seen. It was a monstrous ziggurat rising 300 feet into the air, a stepped pyramid of baked brick that anchored the great city of Babylon. It was restored to its full, terrifying glory by King Nebuchadnezzar II, a ruler whose ambition knew absolutely no bounds. He did not build it to fight God. He built it as a stairway for his own supreme deity, Marduk, to descend to earth. The very top tier was covered in brilliant blue glazed bricks, shining like a fallen piece of the sky. Its real name was not Babel. It was Itemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. 17 million baked bricks, millions more dried in the sun, hauled by the sweat and blood of conquered nations. So why did the Bible claim this architectural marvel was destroyed by a divine curse of confusing languages? To answer that, we must look at who was actually building this tower. It was not a unified humanity. It was the architects of an empire. Babylon was a melting pot. Merchants from the Indus Valley, scholars from Egypt, laborers from across the Fertile Crescent. They spoke Aramaic, Sumerian, Akkadian, and Hebrew. Babel wasn't about the confusion of language. It was about the power of empire. To the subjugated people, Babylon was a golden prison. Its tower was not a bridge to God, but a monument to the king's ego. Nebuchadnezzar demanded absolute loyalty. The tower wasn't confusing the people. It was binding them together under one royal will. But remember, the people who wrote the Tower of Babel story were captives. They were the ones forced to build these monuments. They saw the city as a den of sin. They saw the tower not as a bridge to God, but as an act of defiance against the divine order. So when they wrote their history, they flipped the script. They turned the king's ambition into a moral catastrophe. The story of Babel was not about the loss of language. It was about the loss of power, the memory of captivity, and the struggle to understand. And in the end, time itself leveled the tower. Nothing remained but dust, clay, and the whispers of a memory. The tower is gone, but the fear it ignited, the fear of a world without a single, unifying language, remains with us. We still build our towers today, in glass, in code, in political borders. We still fear the confusion of voices. I have carried these stories across continents, from the flooded plains of Sumer to the ruined libraries of the world. The stories change, the towers fall, the languages evolve, but humanity remains, always building, always forgetting, always searching for something that isn't really lost.